As part of my unquestioned but equally unearned status as a guru on the internet, the two most frequently asked questions I received are what book should I read next? And what should I do with the rest of my life? Under the heading of what should I do with the rest of my life, there are young people going to university for the first time. There are middle aged and older people going back to university after finding they're dissatisfied with their careers at midpoint or what have you. There are women divorcing their husbands. There are husbands divorcing their wives. There are people in a midlife crisis. And refreshingly, once in a while, I talk to more of a retired person, someone at 65 or something, but who is nevertheless asking the tough questions of what they should do with the rest of their life. And these two types of questions, you deal with the same fundamental problem if you are in the position of the guru, which is, I don't know you like that. I am very, very careful in recommending a book to someone, anyone, at any given time. And sometimes the people I recommend books to break down weeping and spit and curse and are very emotionally screwed up by the book I've put in their hands. But if so, it's a book I'm recommending for you at this time, at this moment, because I think it's relevant to what it is you're dealing with, what it is you're going through, right? The question of what should be your major in university, what should you study in college? One of my brothers was a very talented and very proficient guitarist. And I have seen this guy, without a pause, switch between doing heavy metal guitar, classical guitar, and like Spanish guitar, Spanish acoustic. I've seen him do 4 or 5 different styles completely effortlessly. Like even the expression on his face didn't furrow his brow. So this is someone who, there's a question, what is talent and what is proficiency? Whether it was through determination, hard work, repetition, practice, or through some innate combination of traits, this guy had mastered the guitar. Do you know what he didn't have? Taste. He didn't have good taste. He wasn't sophisticated. He was never even really aware of the most mainstream trends, what was going on in New York City or Los Angeles. And indeed, he didn't go to New York City or Los Angeles. He remained an unsophisticated bumpkin. And no matter how well you may be performing music, if you are performing the wrong genre of music for the decade you're alive in, how far can you possibly go? Now, there are a lot of other characteristics it takes to be successful as a musician, especially if you are the one leading the band. Like if you're the guitarist and you're the guy making the decisions, you're naming the band, you're coming up with the lyrics, the song concepts, the album concepts, you're leading the tour, you're the personality on stage. You could list off all the other traits you need to succeed. He's an old man now, this brother of mine. Some of my brothers are like 15 years older than me. He's approximately 15 years old. I really don't know exactly. So he's an old man now, and if he throws a tantrum and sends me hate mail, I'll deal with that bridge when I come to it. It's possible he'll be upset by me talking about it this way. But I think it is fair to say he was an example of someone who was lacking in all of the traits you would need to succeed, aside from skill in playing the guitar. Like that he was great at, right? Now, I don't know how many people he got advice from. Like, I don't know if he went to, like music school. There was someone who was a tutor who trained people in playing the guitar and showed how well he could play the guitar. And someone in that position ever said to him, wow, you've really got what it takes. But if that happened, that person was wrong, right? They were making a judgment just based on how he auditioned, how he played, how he had that manual skill. They weren't looking at the whole man. And what I would call the whole cycle of life, what it takes to be a creative artist in that field. So, would you lightly say to my brother, sure, you can be a musician? To be fair to my brother, he put all his eggs in one basket. Very un-vegan metaphor. So he committed himself to that totally for more than 30 years of his life, for most of his adult life and teenage life. That was all he cared about. That was all he did. That was the only way he tried to succeed. And he didn't develop himself in any other way. So, you might think, if you were in the position of being the teacher or the tutor, you might think that you do no harm in encouraging someone, right? You might think that you do no harm in encouraging someone. Oh, great, you should be a musician. You should go in that direction. The reality is you have no skin in the game. You are not making an investment in this kid you're giving the advice to. You are not risking anything of yours, right? And we have a culture that celebrates encouragement, right? Even if you are encouraging someone to take a long walk off a short bridge, right? Like you're saying to someone, oh, yeah, it's no problem. Just think positive. Just keep walking over that bridge. And in reality, they're walking over a cliff or they're walking over a bridge that's going to collapse under their feet. Right? So just being real with you. I think on the most elite institutional level, that is what we see playing out again and again. There was one example I saw in print that stays with me because it was in print. So this was in something like a student newspaper at Cambridge University, Cambridge, England. Exactly what the newspaper or pamphlet was, I don't know, but it was an informal student-produced affair. And they interviewed one of the professors, who was a guy I knew just from cocktail parties. I was married to a professor, and whatever. I laid eyes on this guy, and he was an imbecile. But he had a PhD, and he was a professor, and so on, And so the students interviewed and said, well, what do you think about this? Because all of these professors are encouraging us as students. Say, oh, yeah, buckle down, get your master's degree in anthropology, get your PhD in anthropology. Every year, the university is cranking out more people with master's degrees and PhDs in anthropology who are paying a lot of money to get this degree. What employment could any of them possibly have? What could this lead to, right? Well, it's not just the case that he has no skin in the game. Like, he takes no risk in saying to you, like, no, look, let's also be clear. The talent of playing the guitar, it's something you can be observed empirically. To some extent, it's objectively real. Some of these judgments, do you have good taste in music? That's hard to establish objectively, right? Are you sophisticated, in your view of contemporary music, your understanding of the market, your understanding of the audience? As a creative person, do you come up with interesting ideas for songs? It's not the same song everyone's heard before. It's something really new and different. These things may be hard to establish objectively, but sure. I remember I had a girlfriend, very short-lived relationship. I had a girlfriend who played violin at this very high competitive level. And she said that they had these tests for how accurately you were hitting the different notes in the scale, like how quickly and accurately you could do certain things in the violin. That apparently, like, they stood there with something like a stopwatch. I forget what it was, but they measured how well you could hit all the marks. You could do these things on violin. So there are some measures where you could say, yeah, you have what it takes to play the guitar. You have what it takes to play the violin. And this other person, they don't have the dexterity in their hand, or they don't have the ear for it. They're tone deaf. Okay, there might be something verifiable empirically that way. Who can say to you that you have what it takes to be an anthropologist? If you guys don't know anthropology, the concept of what an anthropologist is in England is totally different from France, totally different from Germany, totally different from Russia, totally different from California, New York. Like, each of these little covens of anthropologists, they have their own idea. We know what the discipline of anthropology is. We know what the science of anthropology is. We know what makes a good anthropologist. It's crazy. So these professors, these people who make money out of selling you, they make money out of your enrollment, out of your commitment, out of convincing you to commit and spend your own money or spend your parents' money, right? So on the one hand, they take no risk. They don't have any skin in the game if they give you a worthless degree, if they sign you up for a life of unemployment or a completely hollow and meaningless education. I'll talk more about that in a minute. Talk about employment now. Meaning of life is coming next. Don't worry, we cover both in this video. They will actually profit by deceiving you. They will actually profit by giving you bad advice. It's not just that they will suffer from the lack of good advice. It's not being mediocre advice, right? So look, if people ask you for advice about their sex life, if someone says to you they just can't understand why it's so hard for them to get a boyfriend, why it's so hard for them to get a girlfriend, husband or wife, do you really know them like that? Do you really know them well enough to say, this is the problem, this is the solution? I was talking to a friend I've had for about 8 years. And I do know her that way. And it wasn't real entertaining. She was complaining about some stuff in her personal life. I was like, oh, well, here's your problem. And I, not to boast, I think I hit the nail right in the head. But and she did recognize. She was like, wow, that's really good advice. But it was good advice for her, right? This isn't good advice I can give to just anyone and everyone on the internet. All right, we seem to live in a culture increasingly because of internet gurudom, internet expertise, the monetization of advice, expertise, reflections on life on the internet. We live in a world where we pretend anyone can give advice to anyone about their love life without any knowledge of them. So anyone can give you advice on your mental health, on your weight loss and exercise plan, how to solve your problems. You can just pay $49.99 and talk to someone by Skype right now. This kind of totally anonymous. I mean, it's really like a one-way mirror, right? One person can see the other, but the other person can't see back, right? Like it's blind asymmetrically, right? Oh yeah, I can sit here and dish out advice to you guys, and all these guys in my audience. You feel you can trust me because you have been watching my life in detail for 5 years on the internet. I haven't been watching yours, right? This is what do you want to say? A one-way mirror. I think people say two-way mirror for that, but it doesn't make that much sense. Whatever the appropriate idiom is. On one side, it's a window. On the other side, it's a mirror. All right, so I'm going to read you guys this message now. But yeah, sorry, if you can't fill in the blank. As much as we have that problem about people's romantic lives, their love lives, all right, as much as we have that problem with book reviews and recommended reading. Okay, well, the stakes are very high when a young person writes to you and says they're choosing what their major is going to be in university. So I have a message from a member of the audience who writes in, "Hi, Eisel. In your videos, you mention how life is a lifelong learning journey, and I truly sympathize with that. I'm currently in my last year of high school, and I'll begin university the year after. My question is, what should I pursue to learn? What program in university should I take? What career should I choose? And finally, how should I learn? What method should I use? And by the way, university is free in the country where he lives." All right, so you can see I'm anonymizing this. All right. So, first of all, let's just emphasize the things that are unknown to me, sitting unknown in my throne as I sit here as a guru handing down this advice, right? I don't know you. I don't know your talents. I don't know your character. This kid is in his last year of university. He also may not know his talents and his character, right? He may not know himself that well. It's hard to, I don't know, we're talking about 18 years old, something, maybe 17, we don't know, right? Something like that. You may not know if you're even something as obvious as guitar. Maybe you could become good at guitar and you don't know yet. Whatever it's the most obvious thing. How would you know what you're good at that age, right? How would you know what your interests are? And for most of us, our youth is spent playing video games and watching movies and these other things that don't help you develop any kind of self-knowledge of this kind, any kind of analytical, objectively verifiable awareness of what you're good at. Right? So the first thing is, I don't know you. And especially, I don't know you like that. Like, I don't know you well enough to give you that kind of advice. I don't know your city. I don't know your country. I don't know your culture. And look, I can sit here and launch into a critique of everything that's wrong with the study of anthropology at Cambridge University, England, right? I can launch into a critique of everything that's wrong with the study of political science in Canada, right? Now, this is not a complete list, right? Okay, but I'm aware, just in the contrast between England and Canada and France, a lot of those critiques would not be equally true, would not be valid in France. France is a very different country in terms of what's wrong with the university system, right? So like, let's say your specific interest is in getting a PhD in anthropology. I don't know why. And again, earning money is one thing, meaning of life is another, or whatever you want to do. Okay, that's totally different in France. And it's going to be very hard for you to talk to someone who has the in-depth knowledge of that field in France and who is willing to be honest with you about it, right? Now, just a very brief parallel. How easy is it to find someone who knows what they're talking about Buddhism, Buddhist studies, the university level study and teaching of Buddhism, someone who really knows what's wrong with that field and is willing to tell you the truth about it. These are two different things because people have a religious fervor about this. Now, look, Marxism, communism, a lot of these ideologies, and not just Buddhism. And frankly, there were people who were that fucked up about anthropology. Like, even though it's just their career or just their area of study, there were people who have like sociology too. You'd be amazed. There are people for whom sociology is their Buddhism. It is their Marxism or whatever. All of those disciplines, they have their own people in the field, and a lot of those people, whether this is wholesome or perverse, they really get some kind of special thrill out of vindicating their own sense of importance by impressing it upon these teenagers who show up, right? So typical career academic, whether it's you meet as a professor or someone who's actually supposed to give you career advice, a special office like a counselor, right? This person has been a loser their whole lives long. Nobody ever read their PhD thesis. Nobody read the books they published. They go to conferences. Nobody in their own field respects them. Within their own department, they go to department meetings. Nobody in the department respects them. Everyone treats them like crap. Everything is denigrating for them every day. Their landlord doesn't respect them. Their parents don't respect them. They're a loser their whole lives long. And then once in a while, they get to speak to a young person like you who is probably naive. Even if you think you're cynical, they're naive. And that young person says, you're my hero. What I want to do when I grow up is be just like you. I want to have a PhD in anthropology too. Or, I want to have a PhD in Buddhism. Or I want to be an architect. Or I want to be a surgeon and save the lives of people with cancer. But the point is, sometimes it may be wholesome that they have this relationship to younger people who are just getting interested in the field. And they're chuffed, they're proud, they're pleased with themselves. A lot of the time, it is not so wholesome. A lot of the time, it is really perverse. And there's a very strange ego trip on both sides of the equation. So look, I'm going to leave this person anonymous. Melissa and I both have a friend who's just gone through this in the last few months. We have a friend who read my critique of the university system before he enrolled in the university, and who saw my past videos about what's wrong with the university system. So what, Melissa, can you call these out by memory? But what, we have a video just called "The University is Broken" or something like this. If you just, so we have a playlist. I'll have to add this to the playlist. We have a playlist called University Education, Critique of. I'll put the link in the description now. But yeah, the video I was really thinking of is titled "The University is Broken, Academically Adrift Book Review." So that's one I did very much with Melissa. She's on camera with me for that one. Okay, so there's quite a literature for you to see already on my YouTube channel talking about in depth and from different angles what is wrong with the university system. Melissa and I have a friend right now, and he was aware of this. He had both read what I'd written about universities, and he'd seen these YouTube videos. I think he'd seen every single one of them, the YouTube videos on this topic. And he went to a good university in a country with a good university system. He said, Melissa's from Detroit. You understand? I'm from Toronto. Melissa's from Detroit. I have experienced universities all around the world, right? But this is not Detroit. It's not Oakland. He's going somewhere where on a shallow, stereotypical level, you'd think the university would be good. And he has had to have the crushing realization, like, this is happening to me also. Like, all the things Eisel has been saying are perverse and terrible and broken about the university system. In general or globally or in the Western world, it's perverse and terrible and broken for me here also too, that he also is going to endure this terrible thing is happening also. He also is in a position to have to fight against some of the same forces I've described myself fighting against my whole life, including back when I was a teenager and I couldn't handle it so well as I do now, right? So look, I told Melissa an anecdote a couple of weeks ago. This just came up. We take a lot of long walks together. That's why I have such a good tan. We were taking a walk a couple of weeks ago, and the topic of conversation reminded me of this professor I had who was a very, very elderly man. He was past the age of mandatory retirement. So, universities, they engage in some jiggery pokery this way. He was somehow teaching the course after his retirement. So this professor, he looked like he was 70. And in class one day, he was telling an anecdote about his own father, who was closer to 100. So it's a funny story in many different ways, but this is an old man telling an anecdote about an even older man. And both of these guys were born in England and then came over to Canada. I think the son migrated first, and later the father followed in his retirement. And so the father, the guy who's about 100, his eyes are failing, and he's now too far gone to drive a car anymore. He's losing the ability to drive safely. And the son says, "Well, Dad," and as the guy tells the story, a lot of people are like that. He apparently speaks to his own father in a somewhat childish voice. He lapses into a childish voice. He said, "Dad, you could take the streetcar. It's perfectly normal here in Toronto. You don't have to drive yourself around. I mean, everyone else." And the father really crosses his arms and pokes his lip out and froze his brow. He doesn't like this idea. He says, "Well, if you take me the first few times, like if we go together, I'll try it." Like he's really afraid to take the streetcar. And the son doesn't know why. So is it, this guy's 100 years old. Is he afraid of crime? Is he afraid of being mugged or something like, does he have some idea in his head about how dangerous it is to get on the streetcar? And father and son get on the streetcar. And you know how it is. A lot of people, when they get older, they start going deaf. And they speak more loudly to people to compensate for their own deafness. And they sometimes say inappropriate things at a very high volume. I've had this happen in the theater several times, live theater. And, there's an elderly person who doesn't realize how loudly they're talking, it's someone next to them. So in a very loud voice that everyone else on the streetcar can hear, when his father hobbles up to the driver and first comes onto the streetcar, he says loudly, "I want a seat next to the stove." This guy was so old, and it had been so long since he'd been on a streetcar. He imagined the streetcar had a coal-burning stove that both powered the streetcar, right, and heated the passengers. So like, was that a memory from the 1880s or something? What streetcar was he thinking of? What was he imagining, All right, I'll come to the point of the story in just a moment. Understandably, I got a question from the audience. Will the new book, No More Manifestos, be published as an e-text, as a Kindle digital book? No, that's available on paper only. So it's over 600 pages. You have to have it as a book you can hold in your hands. And the advantage will be you can make your own markings in the margins. You can add your own index and table of contents. All right. Why am I telling you this story? That professor, over 70 years old, he was the best professor I ever had. And he reflected a whole set of cultural values and the idea of what it means to be a professor and what it means to be an educator that was left over from approximately World War I. Like, this was really a different world. So that I had that class in the year 2001. For various reasons, I remember that. So everybody in that story is deceased by now. There's no chance any of them are alive. So, again, if you're counting back about 100 years from 2001, all right, maybe not 1880. I don't know. maybe it was a streetcar made in the 1880s that was still in use in the 1920s. I don't know. I don't know what the story was there. It was in a, but the change in the culture of education, the change in the culture of the educators themselves from one generation to the next, the significance of that cannot be exaggerated. Now, am I simply saying to you that they were the good old days and they're gone? No. In the old days, universities were only inhabited by men, no women. Universities were very tightly bound to a notion of the liberal arts, the notion of preparing a gentleman to have a career in commerce. The idea of being a gentleman, there were a lot of civic virtues, public virtues, qualities of character, and so on that have now become laughable. There ceased to be thought of at all in the planning of education. I met one guy, he'd now be 100. He was younger when I talked to him. He described to me his education going into a very conservative liberal arts college. So this wasn't that it was so many years ago, it was probably the 1950s, but the university itself had attitudes left over from the 1910s or something. And, he was forced to learn to swim. I just thought that was bizarre. I said, your university forced you? And they said, yes, they had a list of abilities you were supposed to have as like a young gentleman. Like you're supposed to be able to fight in a sword fight, swim across a river. They had this list of things. You have to be able to ride a horse, just skills you need before you can call yourself a graduate of this institution and get on with your career. So, a lot of those things were bound up in sexist and racist and religious rhetoric and ideals that, marked them for destruction. And I mean, again, if you just go back to those old days and you look at what was taught in a course on ethics, and many universities had a required course on ethics. That was a very common thing in the old days. All young gentlemen should take the required course, Introduction to Ethics. Those days are gone, right? But as positive as that may sound, look at what they were actually teaching, and you will be horrified. Look at the contents of those old courses on ethics. And my field really is politics. Look at what was taught under the heading of politics. It'll give you nightmares also. So I'm not glorifying the irretrievable past here. I'm just saying before it was good and now it's bad. However, if you talk about a university professor born and raised in the 1920s, a university professor raised in the 1940s, university professor from the 1960s, from the 1980s, the degree of cultural change among these elites, it's impossible to exaggerate. All right. So the critique of university education on this channel, I've already provided a link in the description. You can watch the videos I did in the past. I believe the critique of the university system is in No More Manifestos, my new book. There might be a little bit in Future of an Illusion. There might be a little bit in there. But really, it's in No More Manifestos that you get it in writing. This very, very passionate warning about how broken and corrupt and evil the university system is. And so again, talking about this friend Melissa and I have, I mean, he got to read that stuff being discussed in theory. And then he's shocked to find himself, living through it in practice. I think, depending on how old you are when you read that book, No More Manifestos, new book, I could imagine some people thinking, oh, well, he's exaggerating for dramatic effect. And no, this is a deadly serious critique of what's wrong with the university system. The way it beggars and bankrupts families, the way it shatters individual lives, the way it really manipulates the hopes and the hopes and expectations of young people who are seeking an education. And of course, the most painful part to see of all, I was saying this to a friend of mine who's a university professor right now. The saddest part of all is the people it hurts the most are the ones who are the least cynical. I was saying to this friend of mine, I said, the saddest thing to behold is the people who turn up 100% cynical and they say, okay, I'm just here to get my degree in nursing, or I'm just here to get my degree as an x-ray technician, I'm just here to get my degree as a dentist so I can make money and get out. People who have these kinds of mercenary motives where they just regard the university as complete bullshit, as they're there to get this degree to make money, and they regard everything else as horseshit, as a swindle. Those people are damaged by the experience of university the least. And the people who show up and who really care, either they really care because they want to make the world a better place in that sense, or they care because they actually want to learn the content of what's being taught. Just someone who really cares about poetry. Maybe it's someone who cares about philosophy. Maybe it's someone who cares about politics, but someone who cares about history. Maybe it's someone who passionately loves the Japanese language. I mean, it's not necessarily something I sympathize with. But whatever it is, the students who show up with sincere good intentions, who care about the content of the education, they are the most deceived. They are the most damaged of all. And university for them becomes a life-altering tragedy. So look, with all the caveats having been stated, I don't know you. I don't know your circumstances. I don't know your situation. This is what I have to say about what you study in university. Do not go to university until you are such a machine that all you need is the piece of paper with the assignment on it and your library card, and you can go to the university, do the research, write the essay, bang it out, and know it's publishable. Whether or not you can get it published is another question. That's all through nepotism and being friends with the editor of the journal. When you are at the level of expertise that you can write that paper on your own terms and stuff it down your professor's throat and say, I don't give a fuck if you disagree with it. I don't give a fuck if you're a Marxist and I'm an anti-Marxist. I know how to do the research and prove my case and back it up. Whatever the field. And by the way, there are Marxists in all fields. You can have a Marxist in economics. You can have a Marxist in religious studies, English literature, anything. Chinese is a language. You might think you're taking a non-political subject, and you can have crazy Marxist professors. If you go to a conservative Christian school, you can have crazy conservative Christian professors. I mean, there's people pretend that it's only the left-wing universities that are crazy. No, Mormon universities are crazy. Catholic universities are crazy. There are conservative universities, and they're almost all run by religious maniacs. They deal with a different person. So I think the real question you have to ask yourself, again, read the book. You'd be surprised. You will be surprised how many pages of No More Manifestos are about the university system. It is not dealt with briefly. It's dealt with great passion and vigor, in great depth, with a very trenchant and uncompromising tone, because I care about it tremendously. It's one of the reasons I'm very glad I wrote the book now and not 10 years from now, when maybe the memory of university would be more distant and wistful for me. Okay. So the question becomes, what are you going to do between now and when you enroll in university? Because I assume in your last year of high school, you are not at that level of self-sufficiency where you're an autodidact. You can do everything yourself without relying on the professor to hold your hand and teach you. Because guess what? When you get to university, nobody's going to teach you how to do the research. Nobody's going to teach you how to write an essay. If you go into something that relies on math, if your older brother didn't teach you how to do the math, nobody at the university will teach you how to do the math. The fields that rely on knowledge of math or chemistry, if you don't have an independent tutor or your father or uncle or brother or something, if you don't have someone helping you, you are just going to sit down in a theater with 300 students, doing multiple choice exams. And a lot of the students are cheating now. Huge number of them are cheating. But things like that too. If you haven't already gotten to a level where you can do the math yourself, and now you're showing up just to enjoy the lecture and hear the professor's opinion on math, don't go. So then the question becomes, what are you going to do for a few years before you go? Where you will go to university, but not now, not yet. And I'm not going to get into that in the video because that's not the answer to the question you asked. I think in my own life, you can imagine how different it was for me to go to university directly out of high school, which I did at one time, and have my heart broken and be crushed and be totally unprepared for the stupidity, maliciousness, and viciousness of my professors. It's just mind-blowing for me. Nobody told me that. Nobody told me, hey, guess what? Your relationship with your professors is not even the relationship of a prisoner to a jail guard. It's more like the relationship of a prisoner to a cellmate who is trying to rape you, rob you, stab you. Like it's this vicious. It's terrible. It was absolutely terrible. And, my experience in high school was so bad, and everyone told me, don't wait. Once you get to university, it's better. I got to university and it was worse. Totally unprepared for the viciousness of what I encountered. And I'm totally unprepared for the extent to which everything I wanted to learn, everything I wanted to know, it was not in any way going to be touched on in the courses. Even something as obvious as Plato. Oh, you want to know the philosophy of Plato? You got to take your library card and go to the library and work alone. Because even a course that is titled Philosophy of Plato is not going to teach it to you. When you get into things more obscure, that was really cold and chilling and shocking. And, my parents were not going to help me. My parents were insane, still are. The extent to which I was alone, I had to develop and become an autodidact. Okay, what if you're a kid who wants to learn Cambodian? I was. What if you're a kid who wants to learn something a lot less commonly taught than Plato? Okay, what then? So that was a great horror at that age. So here's the thing. Decades later, right, I went back to university when I had already published peer-reviewed papers, when it already developed to a massive extent as an intellectual, doing research, doing writing, and doing all the things you need to do as universities do, when I was already advanced enough to teach courses. I mean, I never taught a whole course, but I have given university level lectures. I've given university level lectures to university students. I've also given them to gathered professors, where everyone in the audience is a professor. I've done university level teaching, and you guys know in China, I was teaching English at the university level. They were final year university students. It was what it was. So, I have all these skills, I have all this preparation, and I'm totally mature and detached and understand the rules of the game. And many of the professors are talking to me as an equal, not as a student. Like, they're commiserating with me as if I'm one of them, rather than so I'm being treated in a very different way. And guess what? It was still tragic. It was still heartbreaking. Still, everyone in the system lied to me, manipulated me, ripped me off, right? And the other thing that changed in my life was that I had parents who, up until very late, I just don't want to make this into an autobiographical video, but back in 1997 to the year 2000, my parents were saying to me, you have to earn money immediately or we're going to kick you out. Like, you're going to be poor on the street. We're not going to support you. They would say this really nasty stuff, pushing me around and insulting me and intimidating me. Like, you got to get out and work at Starbucks. It was really horrible. And I've talked about that since. Before my father died, I talked about it with him. And I've talked about it with my mother, who's still alive now. It was not a trivial thing in my life. I mean, it was really a major source of stress and horror. And that continued all the way up to during the life of this YouTube channel, when I suddenly had to quit my university degree here and move to what ended up being Kunming, China. Now, it's a longer story. How I ended up in Kunming, it's a long story. But at that time, so that's over 5 years ago, but not much more than 5 years. 5 years ago, creeping up on 6 years ago. When that happened, the reason why it happened was that my father said to me he had absolutely no money to pay for my tuition anymore. And tuition in Canada is like $500. It's not a lot. Okay, say $5,000. But it's not like the United States of America. It's not hundreds of thousands of dollars. My father said he had no more money for my tuition, and he was kicking me out, and I had to go and get a job immediately, teaching English in Japan. This is what my father decided, pulling the rug out from under me, sabotaging my university education again. These are two different times I went to university, and my parents ruined it for me. And, whatever. I took a philosophical attitude towards it. You can go back and watch the YouTube videos in that period. You can see how I cope with it. I mean, you can see in some ways I'm under emotional strain. And you can also see the writing I did during that period. Many of the essays I researched and wrote for university that many different people said were works of genius, and professors, not all professors liked me, but some professors were tremendously impressed by the research I did and the essays I wrote at that time. It is what it is. So, you can go back with that level of preparation, and you will still fail because the system is broken. It really is that bad. But the ultimate product of your education is you, right? So even if you presume failure on either path, like even if you just acknowledge the university system is totally broken and there's no way to succeed and there's no way to win, you still have a choice of whether you're going to lose on your terms or you're going to lose really being a victim of a system that you are just too young and defenseless to fully understand. So that is my advice in concluding this video. You asked me what you should major in, and my answer is read my book, watch my other videos on this playlist dealing with just this subject, and then recognizing that we're now going through a period of time in which the university system is utterly corrupt. utterly broken, utterly dishonest, it's really working against your interest, you will need a few years in between the conclusion of high school and the beginning of university to develop yourself, even if it is just so that you have the skills that you need to succeed in a university context that is fundamentally hostile to you, that is fundamentally inimical to you, in which your professors are not helping you. Your professors are ripping you off, sabotaging you, exploiting you, insulting you, emotionally breaking you down, and in terms of your career progress, trying to hold you down. Now, that's what you got to be prepared for. I would compare this to talking to a young person entering the military. Be prepared for being robbed, in your bunk bed by the other guys in your unit. I've read a lot of stories about that. Literally being beaten up by other guys on your army base. Having a commander or a commanding officer who's a terrible person. He may beat you up and rob you himself. I've read accounts of that. Be prepared for the absolute worst. Be tough enough and resilient enough and self-sufficient enough that you are not expecting any of those people to help you. You're not expecting any of them to be your friends. You're expecting them all to be your enemies. And you can still succeed at the training. You can still get the skills down. You can still be excellent in your capacity within the military, assuming total hostility from all the other people in the institution whose job description says that they're to help you, but actually they're your most intimate enemies. Put it that way. They're the enemies on your side, the enemies sleeping in the same barracks with you, right? Now, if you say that to someone who's going into the army, and then as it happens, they're with some wonderful guys. Their commanding officer's a great guy. The other's great. You went in prepared, right? If there's one person at your university who is kind and patient and helpful to you, I'm happy for you. But I've got to tell you, I've been lied to and ripped off and mistreated, even by the people whose description is counselor. You know what I mean? Even by the people, who have a sign on their door saying we're here to help, and they're not. They're not there to help. And I began this with the kind of parable of my brother, the guitarist, and the sort of subtle way in which, just out of a culture of encouragement, someone who's a guitar tutor might say to him, hey, you're really skilled. You should have a career playing guitar. And that could lead to someone's ruin, that encouragement, right? Well, the way in which authority figures in a university ruin your life, again, sadly, it is much more perverse than that. So I think that's enough for this one video. If you were to ask me the question, can university education make you stronger? Can university education make you smarter? All this conflict and hostility I described, well, couldn't it be like for the best, like steel sharpens steel, this kind of challenge? Only if when you go in, you're already smart enough, you're already strong enough. And I'd say that about the military too. If you are the toughest guy in your unit, right, it's fine for other guys to try to stare you down, right? And you can laugh it off. And you get into fistfights with other guys, and you may laugh it off together the next day, maybe that's your experience too, right? If you go in and you are tough enough to be a contender, that's one thing. But that kind of conflict, that kind of hostility, as easy as it is for a Hollywood movie to only show you the aspect of it making strong people stronger, it also takes the weak and makes them weaker. And the particular type of strength and resilience you need before you go into that university context. Although I don't know you and I don't know what you want to study, I don't even know what country you're in or what city you're in or what your institutional options are, I can say with total confidence, there's no way your parents have equipped you with that. And there's no way the experience of high school education would have given you those tools to succeed, not because of the institution, not thanks to the nurturing, helpful nature of the institution, but despite the institution, where you are really going in with the understanding that sadly, the professors, the administrators, they really are a kind of aristocracy. And you are in the position of either being a humble or a rebellious peasant.